Hello and welcome back to episode 13 of Red Brick Recap. Well, I'm joined once again by my co-host Ted. Ted, how are we doing today?
Cold, very, very cold.
It is cold, but it is nice to be home. It's the first time in 2 weeks that I've been back at my desk to record a podcast, so it's nice to be back at the scene of the crime. Yeah, very cold this week. Finals week's heating up for both of us, so both very busy, both pretty much constantly working on stuff, but still making the time to come on here and talk about Redhawks sports. So let's jump right in. We got a lot to talk about this week. Obviously, we'll get to the MAC championship in Detroit on Saturday, and we have a big basketball game coming up on Friday that we'll get to as well. But let's start off in the hockey rink. Ted, let's call what it is. It's not great.
Yeah, not great kind of feels like an understatement. It has been rough, but it's also something that we have expected. It's not something that kind of comes as a shock or comes as a surprise. You'd still like to see a better record than 3-11-2. That is rough, to say the least. And it doesn't get much better. I mean, we talk about it all the time. It does not get much better. This weekend, they have the joy of hosting number 16/17th ranked North Dakota at Goggin. So back-to-back games against one of the best teams in the country is never an easy task. And then they follow that up going to national champions Denver. So it really does not get a lot easier, but there is a nice little break. This is the last series until January 10th. So the NCHC does do a bit of a break for Christmas and holidays and, everything in between. But yeah, looking at the schedule, I think we talked about it. We kind of predicted that we don't see another win until Arizona State, but that's not until the end of January, early February.
Yeah. And even Arizona State's like that's by far from being a gimme. Like those are going to be tough, hard fought games. But yeah, I think we talked about it with Joe before the season even started that at this point we were expecting best case scenario 5-6 wins. Realistic expectations probably in this 3 to 4 range, which is what we're seeing right now. Which again, I feel like we kind of harp on it every time we talk about hockey, but this team literally hit rock bottom last year. The only way to go was up, and they are going up. This is not a stagnant team from last year. This is a new team, still gelling, a new head coach. This was kind of the expected outcome, as harsh as it may be to say, that Miami just simply is not on the level of some of these other programs yet, and it's going to take time to get there. Obviously, with National Signing Day yesterday, they pulled in a really nice class from the USHL, or at least primarily USHL. Obviously, we know Noreen knows that league very well. He coached in it for a long time. So reinforcements are coming, and I don't think this is going to be a consistency of us being in this kind of like 3-15 stage at this point in the season, especially once we get some of these younger classes coming in. I don't know much about the whole hockey recruiting process, and we can dive into that a little bit later, but from what I've heard and from what I've read, it sounds like it's a very impressive class. It sounds like Noreen has gone out on the road. I think he brought in a recruiting coordinator who seems like he's doing an excellent job on bringing in some of these names. So the future is bright, even if it doesn't seem like it right now. Obviously, it's a long climb to get back to the top or to the apex of college hockey, but it's baby steps. Rome wasn't built in a day, and there is signs of progress here. So it's not all doom and gloom, but yeah, Miami hockey is sometimes tough to watch this season.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing about kind of where Miami hockey is currently, it's a mesh of the old guys and it's a mesh of the new guys, and it's kind of like, all right, everybody's kind of playing to figure out like what their next step is, right? It's not necessarily, oh, I'm playing. Yeah, of course, it's always I'm playing for Miami, I'm playing for the team across my chest, but when it comes into these years where there's so much uncertainty, it's sort of the playing for the name on your back becomes a little bit not more important, but there's more weight that players hold to it. But yeah, like we said, we kind of expected the out of conference games to go a little bit better. I know we talked with Joe about the out of conference games and how they probably should have gone a little bit better. But now we're in conference, and I mean, it was not pretty last week. 3-0 and 8-1 against Omaha. Like, ouch.
Yeah.
Ouch, to say the least. But yeah, I mean, like you said about the recruiting class, this is a very nice recruiting class. 11 guys is always, pretty good. And then I mean, it feels like you see on Twitter, like, these guys are pretty highly ranked prospects. And again, I don't know how hockey recruiting works. I kind of wish we had Joe on here to kind of talk about hockey recruiting. But at the end of the day, like the this should be a more promising squad next year, and we're gonna have guys that, knock on wood, should be here for a long time. They're not, maybe not look to transfer as early. And we have it in the notes. All 11 might join the squad next year, which is a lot of turnover, but it's good turnover, right? It's guys that Noreen has brought in that he wants here for a specific reason. And most of them have already played for him too. And that's another big thing. I mean, there's a ton of guys from the USHL. There's a handful of guys from the Tri-City Storm. So these are guys who have played for Noreen or played against him and know his system. So I think that turnover the negative effects would be mitigated due to the fact that, like, they know the system.
Well, that and I also think there is something to say about getting guys into the college system early. Like just having that exposure to the speed and the physicality of college hockey. I know it's completely different than the amateur leagues and like the AAA. Again, the hockey hierarchy still kind of confuses me, but I have to imagine that it's kind of like going from high school football to college football, where there's a significant jump in physicality and the style of play and what you need to do to succeed. So I think getting these guys on campus early is great. If it works for everyone, great. If it doesn't and a couple guys hang back, totally understandable. That's how college hockey works. But there is something to be said about getting guys on campus early and, yeah, letting them kind of develop and kind of do trial by fire and be like, this is how you have to play. Either you sink or you swim. But I want to talk about, before we talk about the recruits, because I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. Let's talk about the current team. I'm looking at the box scores from the 2 games this weekend, and especially in the 8-1 one, like for how much we've talked about the goaltending, it's kind of become not a weakness, but disappointing in a way, because I'm looking at the stats, at least from the 8-1, and obviously 8-1 tells you the story of how that game went. But the save percentages were not super high. Like the total was 35 saves to 8 goals. I don't know what my math is like right now, but that's a pretty low percent. That's like in the high 70s, I want to say. High 70s, low 80s for save percentage. And they're both in the 87, 88% range for the season. So that's indicative that something just wasn't working for them that day, which, I mean, off days happen to everyone, but just across the board from what we expected to see from some of these guys coming in just did not happen.
Yeah, the goaltending has been disappointing, but I think like you got to kind of take it with a grain of salt. Like these are both still, the main 2 goaltenders that Miami is using is Bruno Rivera and Ethan Dalmir, and these are guys who are really, really young, right? Bruno's only a sophomore, and Dalmir is only a true freshman. And the NCHC is a ridiculously hard conference. And I feel at some points, Dalmir might, and even Braveras to a degree, they may still be deer in headlights when they see that puck coming towards them. Because, I mean, Dalmir's played, they've both played in either some junior leagues or some international leagues. I don't really know Braveras' background, but I think they've both played in junior leagues. But, that puck is a lot different. It looks a lot different coming off of the stick of a 4th-year NHL prospect than it does a kid who's just trying to make a name for himself. So,
right.
Look, the scores are tough, but this is all good experience for them, and just kind of cut them a little bit of slack. I get it. Seeing an 8-1 box score is kind of gross, and it doesn't give you a lot of, like, I don't want to say hope for the future, but it doesn't really necessarily give you a lot of, like, positives to take away. But, like, these guys are young; they're still finding their rhythm. And I mean, at least next year, I would expect Dalmir to have a better year, because like once you find that rhythm in the NCHC, once you figure out like what it's all about, you just become so much more comfortable, so much stronger. I mean, we saw that with like you see that with Ludwig Pearson, right? It's like he was a guy who was at Miami for 3 years, and each year he just got consistently better and better and better. Then he transfers to one of the top, the top teams in the NCHC. You don't just do that. Like if you're not comfortable in the conference, you don't just do that. And he went out there and he absolutely stood on his head, at North Dakota. So it's things like that where it's like, yeah, it looks rough, but we got to take positives away from the season.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the theme the rest of the way. Is like it's going to be rough. The NCHC is hard, but you got to take positives. So that's going to be the mantra for watching Miami hockey the rest of the way. They've got a tough weekend series against North Dakota, like we talked about. It'll be interesting to see how that attendance turns out with everything going on in Miami sports right now between the MAC championship, the Indiana game, and also the fact that it's finals week next week. So, a lot going on in Oxford, but it'll be interesting to see. I hope it's a good crowd. They deserve to fill that. That Goggin deserves to be packed every night because that arena is just gorgeous.
Yeah, Goggin is it's one of the smaller arenas, not only on Oxford's campus, but just in college hockey in general. And even if it's like 60 to 75% full, it feels like it's a packed house every single night. And that's, I think, one of the things that people miss about it is like, all you got to do is show up. Like at this point, like there's food at the games. There's, for those who are of age, there's alcohol at the games. And at the end of the day, you're probably going to see some NHL prospects on both sides. Like, so that's fun. You don't get to see that every day, right? It's like when all of a sudden somebody's like the top player in the NHL, you can be like, oh, I saw him in college, right? Like, I mean, I've been able to do that with a couple of prospects. There was a guy from Western Michigan, the goalie. His last name Boosie. He was from Western Michigan, and I saw me and my older sister. We were like, oh my gosh, this guy's last name is so funny. Yeah, whatever. We saw him play at an AHL game, which is right below the NHL. But it's like, oh my gosh, we got to see him play in college. That's pretty cool. And then even like Red Savage, right? He's a Detroit Red Wings prospect, and he got to play at Miami. It's like, okay, cool. I got to see this guy who possibly could play for the Red Wings one day, right? Like, and I think that's what the students are missing. So hopefully they can pack the house at least 60%. I think that's what the average numbers are. It's like 60% of fans are students at those games, which is what Miami really likes to see. I read that in that report that has come out that Miami wants to make some kind of major changes to campus, but that's a whole different story.
That's gonna be a topic for an episode where there isn't a lot going on. we can sit here and talk about that for a while. But let's switch gears here. Let's talk about the two basketball teams on Miami's campus. Let's start with women's basketball. Tough loss against Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky's a pretty good program, so it's not the end of the world. And obviously a 4-2 start to the season, you're never going to complain about. Ted, what jumped out at you about this game?
My girl, Angelina Gonzalez. I talked about her not last week, but I think the week before. She's a spark plug off the bench. She played 30 minutes off the bench and led the team in scoring, 22 points and 6 rebounds. Like, whew, come on. I mean, what more could you ask for? Your sixth player off the bench, right? Like, Amber Treader looked good per usual. She's a star of the team. 17 points, 9 rebounds. The main thing that concerned me is, you said it, right? Or we both said it. Like, this team is going to go as far as everybody else takes them, right? It's not just going to be Amber Treader. It's not going to be the Amber Treader show. Everybody else is going to have to chip in. Everybody else is going to have to contribute points. And no one else on the team had over 4 points. That's not a winning recipe right there. I mean, Gonzalez and Treader, they contributed 39 of the 60 points for your team.
Well over 50%.
Yeah, 65. Yeah, that's 65%.
Yeah.
That's not not always a winning recipe. So I think, moving forward, people got to start making shots to continue the hot streak. I mean, you've seen it, right? The teams, when they beat the teams, everybody's scoring, right? Nobody's having these kind of like ridiculous games. But the 2 losses, it's like, okay, not everybody's scoring, and I know that seems intuitive, but it's like spread the ball out. If everybody's cooking, then it's much harder to stop than just 2 people.
Yeah, I mean, it also gives such a different challenge for defenses too if you don't have to just focus on 2 people. If you're able to kind of attack in so many different ways with a bunch of different players on the floor, then it completely changes the look that defenses give you and completely changes their plan for you. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You wrote this stat in the notes. I don't think I noticed it when I first looked at the box score, but 25 turnovers to 11 assists. That's not how you win basketball games. That 25 turnovers, I think, is the most from either team this season in one game so far. 25 turnovers alone is a ghastly number that needs to be addressed in practices going forward, and is just not sustainable if this team's going to compete at any level. But also the 11 assists just tells me that they're really going to these two options and not really looking to spread the ball out at all. Maybe it's just the shot making. I didn't dive a ton into the film, but maybe that was just a shot making factor. Maybe there just were open looks that weren't falling, which happens on some nights. That's fine. That's preventable going forward. But yeah, that stat really jumped out as something that just cannot happen again.
Yeah, so this is I'm going through the box scores right now, just quickly going through, and this is actually the biggest or second. I think it's the second biggest discrepancy between assists and turnovers. This is actually not. This is okay. Wow, I keep getting blown away with this stuff. So this is the third biggest assist to turnover discrepancy. Their highest in a game was against Hiram College, where they won 97-41. They had 33 turnovers to 5 assists.
How does that work?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the wrong team. Miami had.
That would be really tough to score.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I was looking at the wrong team. That's why my brain was not working. So the Hiram game is 17-14.
Okay.
Miami 18-9. So I may have messed up this stat. 19-21. What is this? 17-22.
You really threw me for a loop there. It'd be really tough to score 97 points with 33 turnovers.
So in the win against Austin Peay, they had 10 assists to 21 turnovers. That was a game that I got to work sideline, and I talked to Coach Box, and he was like, "Turnovers have got to stop." So so it is. I was correct. It is 25-11. So I think it's the second most, or maybe it is the most they've had all season. But yeah, it's something that Coach Box has really emphasized is we got to cut down on the turnovers, especially in that Austin Peay game. I think he said that they kind of got lucky that they had a lot of turnovers and not a lot of assists, and they were still able to win the game. As we saw here, not so lucky.
Right. Yeah. Well, we keep talking about, they got some important games coming up. Dayton on the road tonight. I think it's 7. So that'll have already happened by the time this pod goes out, and then in 12 days they play Purdue at home. I don't know my schedule yet. There's a very good chance I'll try and be at that game and cover it live. So keep an eye out for coverage of that. But yeah, 2 huge games coming up before we get into MAC play. Ted, what are you looking forward to in this Dayton game tonight?
It's a kind of a rematch. Not a rematch, but I think they played last year or maybe 2 years ago. But former Redhawk Ivy Wolf, she was a freshman I think she just played her freshman year at Miami. Coach Hendricks, that whole thing happened. Wolf transfers to Dayton, and then Coach Box comes in, or maybe she played her sophomore year too. But anyways, she's a former Miami player. She was great for Miami. Okay, she did play her sophomore year at Miami. Okay, yeah, but she's been great, right? She's been really, really good. She leads the team in scoring. She leads Dayton in scoring. She's got 17.4 points per game. Nobody even has over 10 points a game for the Dayton Flyers. So it's the Ivy Wolf show, right? So I'm really looking forward to that. Who's gonna step up for Miami, and kind of take the challenge of guarding Ivy Wolf. I would like to see Gonzalez in that starting lineup. Maybe put Singer or Chandler off the bench and to have Gonzalez guard Wolf, because as we've talked about, Gonzalez, she brings a lot of energy, she brings a lot of passion and a lot of fire, and if she can get under Wolf's skin, Wolf's not going to have a great night. So.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That'll be a game to watch for sure. We also want to shout out former Redhawk, now Oregon Duck, Peyton Scott, who's coming back from a brutal knee injury, which is her second of her career, and is now starting for the Ducks, averaging on 12, coming off a 23-point game with 2 and 2. A not really impressive stat line. Obviously, we're supporting former Miami athletes as they move on in their careers as well. So shout out those two. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The matchup with former Red Hawk coming to face her former team is going to be really fun to watch tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out Peyton Scott. I got to interview her my freshman year when I was running my own podcast. And she's a great person. She's really nice to talk to. Every time I saw her after that, she always came up, said hello, asked me how I was doing, things like that. And yeah, she had a really bad knee injury at Miami, and then first game of the season blows out her knee at Oregon. So she's coming back. She's a key starter now at Oregon. I mean, that's great. She's one of the Miami all-time leading scorers. So it's really glad to see her having success.
Let's pivot now and talk about what was probably the highlight of Miami sports over the last week and kind of went semi-viral all over the internet. Peter Suter for the men's team against Air Force. 42 points, which is the most a Red Hawk has scored in the 21st century. The last person to eclipse 40 was Wally Zerbiak in the NCAA tournament with 43. And 81% from the field is just mind-blowing. And, I mean, the entire arena felt that it was probably the best home crowd that I've seen so far this year. I haven't been at every home game, but it was a lively home crowd. It was pretty full, and they got behind the team. And when Suter went on that little, I think we went on a 10-0 solo scoring run, the building erupted because I don't think anyone knew or was really paying attention to how well he was doing until he got to the 30-point mark. And then people were like, oh, wait a minute, we might be watching something historic here. And it turned out we were. So shout out Peter Suter. That's probably the performance of the year already for the men's team. Plenty of time for that to be changed though. But yeah, that just blew me away. I was in the crowd live tweeting it, and it got to interview him after the game, and just an insane performance from him. And really what more can you really say?
Yeah, I think the funniest thing is that it's always kind of a big deal when somebody from Miami scores 20 points. It's like, oh my gosh, he scored 20 points. And then all of a sudden it's you check your phone and you're like, holy crap, he's got 30 points. And the next thing you know, he's got 40 points. And watching the game and hearing the crowd, when he got 40, that building erupted.
It was
he erupted. And then, even at the end of the game, right, when he had the ball with 7 seconds left, he's at 42. They're chanting 45, 45. Because if you don't know, 45, Ron Harper, all-time single game scoring record for Miami. But yeah, he was the best thing about it is that Suter was super efficient. 80, as you mentioned, 81% from the floor. He played all but 2 minutes of the game. He was 75% behind the 3-point line. He was even kind of efficient from the free throw line. He shot over 50%, which I guess isn't, that's not really efficient. Not super efficient, but it is above 50%. But again, that's where he left points on the table. He was 5 of 9. If he had just hit 4 and went 9 for 9, he's usually money from the free throw line. He would have broken the record, but it's just incredible. And on a night where the team didn't really help him with scoring. It was really all Peter Suter, right? Nobody else scored above 9 points. Your main other scoring option, Cam Kraft. This is probably, as Coach Steele said, the only night that Cam Kraft is going to put up a goose egg in the box score. Yeah. He had 0 points, but he helped out in other ways. He had 4 rebounds. He had 1 steal. He was still doing other things, but that's just something I do want to make a note of. Cam Kraft, he is a second half player, in my opinion. I feel except for maybe the first 2 games, he's started out kind of cold. It kind of looks like he's, I don't want to say janky with it, but I don't know. I feel he turns it on in the second half a little bit more than he does in the first half. So I do want to make note of that and see how that kind of plays throughout the year. But I would bet coming into this Indiana game, he's gonna shoot the lights out.
He's going to have a green light for sure. I mean, we've seen it in other games. He's probably the best pure scorer on the roster, in my opinion. And obviously, the box score didn't show it. But what was interesting to me about the Air Force game was that it wasn't like the ball was being forced to Suter. Like he was just in the right places all the time, which is kind of what we saw in some of the other wins this season. We kind of noticed it again after the App State game. Obviously, we couldn't watch the games, but we heard like Suter was in the right places in the Fort Myers tournament, ended up taking home MVP of that tournament. So he's doing the right things, and he's kind of becoming this not alpha, but like the conductor of this team. He's kind of becoming like the ringleader, like directing traffic. And when nights like this occur where guys aren't scoring the rock as well as they have in the past, he can kind of jump into this alpha mode and kind of become the number one scoring option. And he did that at a remarkably efficient rate. And I want to bring up one moment where he kind of walked down the court and then just pulled up for three. And it was a bona fide heat check. Like everyone in the building knew he was going to pull it, and somehow they still decided to sag off him on the 3-point line. And the crowd pop when that went in, I think it gave him like 38 on the night, was insane. Like that was the most engaged I've seen a Millette crowd, and that most full I've seen a Millette crowd in a long time. So that was really fun to see. Shout out Suter for an incredible game. And yeah, huge win against Air Force. I mean, we'll talk about IU in here in a second. But one more thing I wanted to bring up is Luke Skaljak. I don't think he's missed a shot since the Wright State game. I think he's 100% since the second game of the season.
Well, let's check out his stats.
When I wrote my recap, I double checked, but I'm pretty sure he hasn't missed a game since Wright State, or missed a shot since Wright State. He had another, I think, 9 on Monday. Again, he always finds himself wide open on the 3-point line or in the middle of the floor, and he is always able to knock down the shot. So I've been really impressed from what I've seen from him. I think he's a super talented player that's going to fit very well into what Coach Steele's trying to do. So yeah, especially as we kind of move forward into MAC play and it's kind of some more intense competition, I'm going to be very curious to see how he plays. But for right now, I'm really encouraged from what I've seen.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. He has not missed a shot since that Wright State game. He was 3 of 3, 1 of 1, didn't take a shot versus Siena, 2 of 2 and 3 of 3. And Coach Steele mentioned it in his post-game press conference. Luke Skaljak is going to be a stud. He is going to be a guy that you hope that he stays at Miami all 4 years, because he is on a development track right now where it's like, I mean, that his shot is pure most times. Like for a lefty, he's got a really, really nice looking shot. It's not janky. It doesn't have a hitch. Like it's really, really nice. So one thing I do want to see more from him, and this is going to come as he gets more and more comfortable. I think towards MAC play, you're going to see him do it a lot more. I need more attack from him. You mentioned it in the notes. The rotations might need a little tweaking. There are some periods out there where Miami they don't look threatening on offense. I would love to see Skaljak take that, kind of like, all right, I'm going to be the spark plug off the bench. I'm going to be the guy, to come in and get buckets, because he can get buckets. We've seen he can get buckets. It's just a confidence thing, and I hope Coach Steele can instill in him like, hey, you got the green light. I mean, you have the ability to play and be that guy off the bench. So that's kind of the hope. And again, it comes in waves. It comes with confidence. And then shout out our guy, Ian Elmer. We're always going to shout him out on this podcast. He had 9 points, and I think it was 7 rebounds. 9 points, 7 rebounds, 1 block, 1 steal, near double-double. And he's averaging 14, 6, and 1 for the season. So it wasn't his best game by any means, but he's still contributing in a plenty of healthy ways. And I mean, 14, 6, and 1, like that's probably MAC all 13 level, and especially if Miami keeps it up. I mean, they're 5-2 for the first time since 2020. I want to say 2020, 2021, or no, 21, 22, and that was when they had their best start ever, where they went 5-0, and then immediately dropped 5 straight right after that.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, I mean, I mean, we also have it in our notes too. The defense was huge. I mean, we talk about the offensive output, but let's talk about the defensive output for a second. I mean, Peter Suter was everywhere on the defensive end. Um, and then the duo of Reese Potter and Antoine Woolfolk, they kept their big guys out of the game.
Yeah.
Taylor and C. Sealy Hosky. Sealy Hosky. That's how you pronounce it. Sealy Hosky. There we go.
Okay, we'll go with that.
That's what I found on the internet, and that's what I found in the ESPN broadcast. Apologize to Wesley Sealhosky if we pronounce it incorrectly. But he came in averaging 10, only 2 points. And then Taylor averaging 18 a game. He had 12, but he shot 30%.
Yeah.
So they looked good. They looked good.
Yeah, I mean, Suter was the primary guy on Taylor. It was not just Suter the entire game. I mean, I think Elmer had some possessions where he was on. Cooper was switched onto him a couple times. So team effort to stop Taylor, and he still made some huge shots. I mean, the one that sticks in my mind is when he's basically level with the scorers table and chucks a turnaround three, and it still drops. Like from 35 feet in, nothing but net. So he made some shots in his stats, maybe a little bit buoyed by some of these circus shots he made. And I think Steele said that post game as well. But the team defense on the perimeter was very, very good. And I talked to Coach Steele about it after the game, but the Potter Woolfolk duo I'm just going to call him Wesley. I'm not going to call his name on their 7-footer Wesley in the paint. Kind of took away what they were trying to do, especially early in the game, because it felt like, especially in the first 5-10 minutes, every time they got the ball in the half court, the ball was going into the paint. And one of Woolfolk or Potter, or sometimes even both were on the floor, were on him, trapping, limiting what he's able to do, not letting him turn around and get into a shot. And I think that kind of made Air Force adjust to what they were doing and maybe did not have the amount of success they thought they were going to have in the paint. And I think that's a testament to both Antoine Woolfolk, who we've talked about a ton. I know he's your guy, so I'll let you talk about him in a second. But Reese Potter, for a guy that played 6 minutes just against UMES a couple days ago, or less than a week ago, maybe just over a week ago, to now playing significant. I think he had over 20 minutes. I'd have to double check, but going from that is a significant jump, and to make it and still be very effective on the defensive end, maybe could have had more of an impact on the offensive end. That will come. He still had 6 points on 60% shooting. Far from bad, but in 18 minutes, to guard a very talented player like that was very impressive, and especially coming off what Coach Steele said was some kind of undisclosed injury was very, very encouraging, especially when we're going to need him later on in MAC play.
Yeah, Harper writes he didn't touch a basketball for 6 months, is what he said in his press conference a while ago. But yeah, I liked what I saw from Reese Potter. He's a guy who, if you can get him going, he's really nice with it, to put it in simple terms. There was a game, I think it was against Bowling Green. I can't remember, but he had 15 points in the first half. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. And then they didn't feed him the ball at all. He finished with 17. And I was like what? He was cooking them. And he was it was in the flow of the offense too. And I was like, what? I was like, why did you take it away from him? He was cooking. But yeah, so encouraging signs from Reese. Obviously want to see him healthy, want to see him continue to play well. They're definitely going to manage his minutes because we don't want him to, get hurt before MAC play, because the front court is still really thin outside of those two. But yeah, let's talk about Ant for a second. He fell out in this game. That, you look at it and you go, oh, he fouled out. But he played really, really good minutes, and he provided really, really good stretches. And again, Ant does give up he gives up 3 inches for, at least in this matchup, he gave up 3 inches of height. And there are going to be matchups like that where he's giving up height. I mean, it's going to happen against Indiana, which we'll talk about in a second. But he played really good stretches. He only shot the ball 5 times. I would like to see that go a little bit more or a little higher, but he did only shoot 40% from the field. So if it's going to go higher, you got to be a little more efficient than that.
Right.
4 rebounds, 2 steals. This is probably, it's not anybody. I mean, really, outside of Suter, it was not really anybody's best game. by far. So I don't think this is like a blip in the road at all for anybody. It's not something to worry about. Again, you're just looking at numbers. Numbers is really hard to like get a read off of. So I am looking forward to where this team can go, and I'm very happy that the team did provide themselves a cushion in case things do go wrong on Friday. And let's just talk about the elephant in the room. Miami goes to Assembly Hall along with Jack Miller. He'll be there live tweeting the game. They go to Assembly Hall and they have to take on a team that was ranked as high as 14 to begin the season. It's going to be tougher than the Michigan game. However, they don't have 3 7-footers like Michigan does, so that's a positive. However, they do have one of the best players from last year and another incredible big man, two-headed monster, Omar Ballo, Mackenzie McLabo.
Yep. Yeah, this team scares me. I mean, we match up better than we did against Michigan just because the height is a little bit closer, but Indiana is probably one of the most talented teams on paper in the country, even if they haven't played like it so far. I watched them a little bit over Thanksgiving break. Unfortunately for them, it was the game where they played Louisville and lost by like 40 points and never really looked like they were competing. And against UNC Greensboro, they looked okay. They got the win, but they didn't look dominant like many were expecting them to. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Omar Ballo is the guy that I highlighted. I think he's going to be a nightmare in the paint for whoever guards him. And I mean, we know what Woolfolk's capable of guarding people in the post. He's played Big Ten basketball. He knows what to expect in these arenas. He's been in these situations. But Umar Ballo is coming from one of the best programs in the country and going to another one of the best programs in the country. He has this track record and has succeeded at these levels. So it's going to be a completely different challenge than what Miami's used to. And he's averaging 12 and a half and 8 rebounds. He had 25 against Gonzaga, which is one of the best teams in the country this year. So I think that's going to be the X factor. If we can limit his productivity in the paint and force it on the perimeter where Indiana can go cold at times, that completely changes the outlook for Miami on Friday.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to figure this out for a second. Matchup wise, we do kind of match up better, but we also don't, if you get what I'm saying. Like,
yeah,
if we take Miami starters, right? They haven't changed. They may not change. I don't expect them to change, but I would say it's going to be the same lineup of Cooper, Kraft, Suter, Elmer, Woolfolk, 1 through 5, right there. And then I don't know who the starting point guard for Indiana is. I'm pulling up their box score against Sam Houston. Their starters were Malik Renault, Mackenzie Mgbako. I know I'm mispronouncing that. I'm just going to call him Mackenzie from now on. Omar Ballo, Miles Rice, and Trey Galloway. If I am Miami, the matchups I would go with are obviously you got to put Woolfolk on Ballo. You have to put you're going to have to put Elmer on Mackenzie.
Yep.
I would say Miles Rice, because I think he's 6'3". Malik Renault. Oh, Malik Renault is 6'9". Jeez.
Put Suter on him, maybe.
Yeah, you're gonna have to put Suter on Renault at this point, and then I would go with Cooper on Rice.
I would go with Cooper on Rice and Kraft on Galloway.
Yeah, because Galloway is the guy who's gonna shoot the crap out of the rock.
Yeah.
He's already shooting 50% from 3 on so that's where I would lean with those matchups. I don't know if I like the Malik Renault against Peter Suter matchup, but I don't think Miami really has another option because you have to have someone who is as lengthy and as switchable as Elmer on Mackenzie, and you have to have Woolfolk on Ballo. There's no other options.
Yeah. All right. Well, real quickly before we jump on to football, what's your prediction for Friday's game?
Cinderella story. Miami wins on a walk-off buzzer beater 3 to win the game. But that's, again, Cinderella story. That's if we keep it close and we eliminate turnovers. That's going to be the big thing. Our problem was turnovers against Michigan, and we couldn't get out to a lead against Michigan when they were struggling with turnovers. If Miami can limit their turnovers, I think they're going to be in it. I don't know if they're going to be or how in it, but realistically, I think Indiana probably wins by 10 to 15.
That's what I was going to say. I think Miami keeps it close and makes it a fight, but I think this Indiana team is just full of star power, and they're at home on a Friday night in front of a fan base that is now a little bit more rowdy than they have been in past years because of the football success. I'd love to say I expect a Miami win. I don't. I think it's going to be a close game, but I think Indiana is going to take the win, and that's a great loss for Miami. That's a great experience for those guys to have. So I think it leaves them with a lot more lessons than like a different game would, but I do think they leave with a loss.
And that's why that Air Force game was so important, because now they have a bit of a cushion, right? Instead of possibly being 500 at the end of the week, they're now 5-3, and you have that little bit of a cushion. And then look, Miami gets into. I may be over speaking here, but Miami gets into some pretty lighter games where they have a chance to really bump up their record. Like just after Indiana, Bethany College of West Virginia, Vermont, and they beat Vermont last year, and I think they can beat Vermont again this year. Sacred Heart and Defiance College, and that's all. Those are 4 games right before MAC play. Say they're sitting at 5-3, they could easily be 9. They could easily be 9-3 or 8-4, and that's exactly where you want to be right going into MAC play.
Well, 100%. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. I'll be live tweeting from Assembly Hall, video coverage and a full recap posted at some point over the weekend. I'll let you guys know about the schedule of content coming out, especially with the back-to-back Friday and Saturday stuff. But speaking of Saturday stuff, let's talk about football. Before we jump into we're going to close with the MAC championship preview just to make sure we have time. There's a couple things that came out in the last couple days that we need to talk about. First of all, Football National Signing Day. Miami ends with the number 75 class in the country, number 2 in the MAC behind Toledo. And what surprised me, Kent State's up there too. Kent State put together a really nice class. They're in the top 100. I think they ended 83rd.
That is their best signing class ever, by the way.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Good. So shout out Kent State for pulling together a class, but Miami's super impressive. Chuck Martin held a press conference yesterday that went semi-viral. He seems to do this a couple times a year where Chuck Martin will just appear in like random viral bubbles every once in a while. But he had some awesome quotes about like how special Miami is, how Miami's program isn't going to change for the player, and that if they're looking to just like be a one and done or like just go to the league, that Miami may not be the place for them. And the quote that really stuck out, and I know we've talked about this or alluded to it, but Coach Martin said, and obviously this is his words, not mine, but he's got kids who have left his program because they got paid by Power 5 schools and are telling kids at the program now, don't leave, don't do it. And we've seen that where guys like Rashad Amos haven't played, and he's posted some things on Twitter that allude to he's frustrated about his lack of playing time. I haven't checked up on Gage Larvadain, but I know the last time I looked, he didn't get any playing time with South Carolina. So yes, these schools are at the forefront of the college football world, but if you're not playing, who cares? So that's my 2 cents, but just shout out Coach Martin and the entire Miami staff for pulling together another top 100 signing class. Second thing I want to talk about, and I'll get your input on both of these in a second, but Miami had 12 guys listed to the All-MAC team. 7 first-teamers, 8 first-teamers, 4 my math's wrong. 7 first-teamers, 4 second-teamers, 1 third-teamer. Kind of the usual suspects we expected to see on that list. Gabbert, Tracy, Strader, Salopek, Ugu, first team. Virgil, Mosey, Subtle-Wise, second team. Blakey, third team. Dom DeJobin gets in there too. Lou Groza, semifinalist. Reed Holsky, kind of the captain of that offensive line. So yeah, really impressive stuff from the Redhawks this year on the recruiting front and on the field. So just wanted to get those things shouted out before we talk about Saturday's game.
Yeah, I love it when Chuck Martin goes viral. I think it's the funniest thing in the world because it's this guy who people like, they don't necessarily know, but they're kind of like, I've seen this guy once or twice before, and then he just like, he's so like unfiltered, really. Like
Yeah.
he doesn't really have like that like PR sense in him to be like, okay, maybe I shouldn't really be saying this. Especially like after the whole like Alabama stole our kicker thing.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I really love the fact that he was like, look, Miami's not going to change for you. Like, I'm not changing my program because you're the number one recruit in the state of Ohio or whatever it is, right? Like, I'm not going to change the way that I coach. And if you don't like it, well, guess what? There are other programs for you. It's kind of the like he's building the Miami way.
Yeah.
And I think he probably takes that up from his Notre Dame days. Like you hear, I'm sure if we had Tim on here, he could talk about the Notre Dame way and the Notre Dame culture for hours and hours and hours. But Miami's building that. Chuck Martin is building that brand, right? He's building the Miami way.
Yeah.
Um, and then I mean, look, I mean, it's exactly like what you said. There are kids who are leaving the program and being unhappy in their role. Gage Larvin, and he had 18 receptions this year and 1 touchdown. Rashad Amos, he is clearly unhappy at Ole Miss. Avion Smith is transferring again. Like, some of these guys who were key contributors who have left. Like, I mean, I think the only player that I can think of who I know specifically has transferred, who's like found some other success, is John Saunders Jr. And he went to Ole Miss, and he played lights out at Ole Miss, really. But you see it, you see it when players transfer in, right? Michael Dowell got instantly better when he transferred here. Cade McDonald has like essentially, I mean, he was a stud punt returner last year, and then became a stud wide receiver this year, right? I mean, even if you want to talk about Gabe Larvin and Rashad Amos, they came from these other schools and they became studs while they were here.
Yeah.
So Miami's building a program, and you can see why they were always, in the top of the MAC. And in my personal opinion, I am biased. I think Coach Martin got robbed for Coach of the Year, but shout out the OU coach Tim Albin. But I stand by it that I think that Miami, given the struggles that they had starting the year, to be able to turn their season around and go to the MAC tournament. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I agree with you. I obviously like we're Miami fans in a way, so like we're a little biased, but I think the storyline was there for Coach Martin, and yeah, but still shout out Tim Alvin. I mean,
Yeah,
Miami's an
absolutely.
impressive season for OU. So taking nothing away what he's accomplished, but I think there was definitely at least a case to be made for Coach Martin.
Well,
We'll
you know
see.
what? Hopefully another MAC championship will do for Coach Martin.
Yeah, I was about to say I don't think he'll care about the Coach of the Year award if he has that title on his belt. But speaking of OU, let's talk about them for our last 12 minutes here. We know what this team is. I mean, we've watched them all season. We watched them play against Miami at Jaeger, where Miami was clearly the better team. But as the old adage goes, it is really tough to beat a good team twice. And as much as we know about OU now knows that just as much about us. So I think a lot of people, I've seen a lot of different opinions about how this game's going to go in a lot of different places. A lot of people have been kind of, I want to say, blinded by how the first game went and kind of distracted by, I don't know what that was. Oh my goodness. And I think people are distracted by how well Miami played the first time and aren't really giving OU the credit they deserve because they ran the table in the second half. Like after the Miami game, it was a completely different team. I'm looking at some of the stats right now. They've got two close to 1,000-yard rushers who are the guys we highlighted before the OU game, which is Anthony Tyus and Parker Navarro. We know what Parker Navarro did against Miami. He wasn't great. He was knocked out of the game. If he comes in with a chip on his shoulder and some fire up his sleeve, that Red Hawk defense is in trouble because we saw what happened when a running quarterback gets hot. I'm going to refer back to the Notre Dame game. Granted, it was 3 months ago, but we saw what happens if a running quarterback gets going against that defense, and it opens up an entirely different dimension that Miami has struggled to deal with at times this season.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like if Navarro gets going, like he's going to be really hard to stop. But I think that has been one of the good things about the Miami defense is that they don't let, especially the run defense. At the beginning of the season, we were really worried about this run defense. Like we talked about it at length, but they've shut us up.
Yeah.
I mean, let's look at NIU for a second. Like NIU is a really really good team at running the football, and the elements were there. It was snowing and raining or whatever it was when they came to town, and Miami stuffed them each and every time, right? Like they had a running quarterback in Ethan Harmon. He didn't run the ball. They had the week before they had 200-yard rushers and one of their wide receivers and the running back. And again, I'm forgetting their names right now, but I apologize. Um, but Miami kept them both under 50 yards combined. So I I am worried about Parker Navarro. I'm worried about him coming in and playing with a chip on his shoulder. But I think if Miami can kind of stop or slow him down from the gates, I think it's going to be very similar to what we saw at Jaeger. If they eliminate his running game, he's going to have to throw the ball. And I mean, he has had some kind of gaudy interception numbers this year.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. We know what he is, and we know what Miami has done to prevent him from having an impact. It's a matter of doing it twice. So I also think it would be a mistake to go in with the exact same game plan. I'm expecting OU to make some kind of adjustments. But what really scares me more about this OU team is the defense. And this defense has been really good for the last 5 or 6 weeks. Obviously, like the points totals may not reflect it. I mean, 21 against Ball State, but like held Toledo to 7, Eastern Michigan to 10, shut out Kent State, but Kent State. Held Buffalo to 16. They haven't allowed 20 points apart from the Ball State game since Miami. That was the last time that was, I think, the only time they allowed 30 or more outside of Kentucky this season and Syracuse, but both Power Fours. So this defense scares the living crap out of me, especially when I'm looking at the stat that says they have 80 TFLs this season in 12 games.
Oh,
yeah, that's a lot of TFLs. That's a lot of QB hits and a lot of running back hits, especially for. Granted, we keep talking about how good the O-line has been, and they have been stellar. Don't get me wrong. The O-line play for Miami has been great, but if for whatever reason that falters in Detroit, that opens up a completely different element to Miami's offense and may have to change how they attack that defense.
Yeah, I agree. The defense does scare me, and I think Miami is. I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Miami cannot get off to a slow start on offense.
Yeah.
Simply put, they cannot get off to a slow start on offense because if they do, they're going to fall behind, and then they're going to have to play catch up. And we've seen from the season they don't really play catch up all that well. Like if they're down by I'll call it 10 plus points. It's really hard for them to come back into games. If they're down a touchdown or a field goal, we've seen them come back from that, but they cannot get off to a slow start because if they do, it's gonna Miami's not gonna win that game. So I would expect the offense to come out firing. I would expect them to lean on Mosey a little bit, but I would not be surprised if Miami's first play is like a bomb down the field to Virgil or Tracy.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that they have to kind of change the look that they gave OU the first time, which was a lot of ground and pound, a lot of these short passes that worked out very well, and they played an excellent game the first time they played. OU saw that. They are a capable team. They've shown they can adjust and are a better football team as a result of that game. So some adjustments are going to have to be made. I think that deep shot and I think the deep pass is going to be a key factor, especially if hypothetically Miami does fall into an early 10-0 hole. Suddenly you're putting a Miami offense that doesn't love to go deep to the test, and like they're going to have to pick up significant yardage and not waste clock, which if there's one thing Miami is very good at on offense, it's chewing the clock. We saw it against Ball State. We saw it against NIU. This team can run minutes off the clock if you give them the football with the lead. But we haven't really seen them, at least not in MAC play and not recently, have to play from being behind. I think the last time was Ball State. And I actually don't know if they were behind against Ball State because they got the stop for the win. But
I want to say Central Michigan when it was like 3-0.
Yeah, but 3-0, like that's
yeah.
Like that's not really a comeback. Like, and granted, they were down against Toledo and they put together a better second half, but we have not seen this team win a come from behind game. I don't think, or at least not by like a significant margin.
No.
We've seen them step up and play better, but they haven't been able to put the points on the board. So I think you're absolutely right that is the major thing that scares me is if OU jumps out to a quick double-digit lead, does Miami have the offensive firepower to come back into the ballgame?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really excited for Saturday. My weekend's going to be hectic. I'm going to be in Bloomington, then back here for about 4 hours, and then we'll be hitting the road again to get to Detroit for the noon kickoff. But yeah, we'll have live stuff going on all weekend for you. Ted, any last thoughts about this Ohio game before we get on out of here?
I would really like to see another MAC championship by the Redhawks.
I would agree. I think, what is that? What would that be, your second in our 5 years here?
Yeah, second in our 5 years here, and then third at my time knowing what Miami, Ohio is.
Yeah, I forget. Yeah. 2019 would have been the last one. Yeah.
Yeah, that was when my sister was a freshman.
And again, we say it every time we play OU, but it's OU hate week. It's once again
OU hate week, little brother.
Once again, rivalry week. We love it. We love rivalry games. The rivalry against OU, it is a rivalry, and there's genuine animosity between the two sets of fans, but it's also a very kind of cordial rivalry, I'll say. Like the two schools kind of respect each other as much as they don't like each other. We're very similar in like size and like the red brick style, and like as much as we hate to admit it, like yeah, they're a fun rival. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of describing it. Like we're cordial. We're not gonna like go burn down a building on OU's campus like some other rivalries will threaten to do. But that does not mean we like them. But I think the best way to put it is that we tolerate them. We don't like them, we tolerate them. Whereas other, call it SEC rivalries, like they do not tolerate each other. Like if you breathe on them the wrong way, they will punch you.
Yeah, no, 100%. And like, I grew up in a soccer household where you couldn't say Tottenham during Tottenham game weeks. Like that was a rule. You couldn't say it. So,
Boys.
Oh, come on. We're not doing that now. But yeah, I think, at least in my opinion, like it's always fun to have a rivalry game that you genuinely care about on the schedule. So like it adds an extra meaning. So like even hypothetically in seasons to come where Miami might go 4-8, but if they win that OU game,
who cares?
Who cares? You win the OU game, that's a success.
Yeah.
So I think it adds a different dimension to the schedule, which is why I want to see it stick around. I don't think it's going anywhere. I think the MAC's one of the few conferences that's kind of secure. But yeah, huge game this weekend. Watch on Friday, watch on Saturday. Follow us on socials. We'll have a bunch of content coming out for you this weekend. Let's get on out of here, Ted. I know we're both pretty busy with finals and stuff. So anything else you want to say before we jump off?
No, just go Redhawks per usual.
Go Redhawks. Well, we will see you all next week. Same bad time, same bad channel for the recap of the Indiana game and the MAC championship. Hopefully we're talking about a win. If we're talking about a loss, it'll be a very different atmosphere in this room. But we will see you all next week on Friday. Have a great week, everyone.